Every veteran has a story of sacrifice, courage, humor, and heartache. Each week, Veteran Story Hour captures these remarkable stories firsthand in the voices of those who've served. Recorded live from the weekly Friday brunch in the Saluda, Virginia studio in Waynesboro, this is more than a podcast. It's a living history, preserving the legacy of America's heroes. You're listening to Veteran Story Hour, Voices of Valor, presented by Saluda, Virginia. Let's begin. Deborah Grassman spent 30 years as a VA hospice nurse practitioner, caring for over 10,000 dying veterans. And when the stoic wall finally crumbled, when there was nothing left to hide behind, she heard the stories nobody else wanted to hear. The untold ones, the buried ones, the ones that get carried to the grave because we're too afraid to create space for them. She pioneered the pinning ceremonies in 2002 that have now become standard practice in hospices nationwide. She founded Opus Peace and identified what she calls soul injury, a wound beyond PTSD, beyond moral injury that separates us from our true selves. This conversation will challenge you. It should. Because healing our nation after war, that's on all of us. Not just the men and women who served. All of us. Ladies and gentlemen, Deborah Grassman.
My name is Deborah Grassman, and I am a nurse practitioner who worked for the VA in hospice for 30 years. And during that time, I took care of more than 10,000 dying veterans. And I will tell you, those dying veterans taught me things that I could learn nowhere else. And so I have been a privileged witness to the things that they have experienced, but more importantly, when they come to the end of their lives and that stoic wall sort of recedes and crumbles a bit, then the real stories come forth, oftentimes unbidden and oftentimes previously untold. And so that is the message. I think an important message about healing is that it always seemed so sad to me sometimes that these stories came forth so late in life. So that's why, John, I appreciate your program and urging people to tell their stories, those untold stories. I'm always after the untold stories. Those are the ones that get buried alive and end up sabotaging people's lives. And then when they come to the end of their lives and the untold stories finally become told, the preciousness of that and being able to unravel that and to be able to restore some sense of wholeness about it so that they can die then in peace instead of having an agitated death with these memories. That, I believe, is what I have been able to bring to the playing field, not only in hospice arenas who are taking care of veterans, but also the veteran community itself, because dying veterans aren't in the midst of live veterans. They're off somewhere else dying. And so the wisdom that surfaces at the end of my life, oh my gosh, John, you won't believe, because of that path that they took after war, after the military. So we're always praising them for what they did in the military. But what I saw that they should be praised for is the journey they had to walk after the military and how to navigate some of that because of their past experiences.
So that would be so unique. Your experience of getting these men and women really in that last 11th and a half hour of their life. And how often, so something that I'm finding now, getting to sit down with these men and women and getting to start to record and capture these stories, just like you're talking about. Do you know what the number one thing they always tell me? The initial ask, hey, I would love to have you on. I want to capture your story. I want to be able to surface it and get the snapshot of whatever moment in your life you're in right now. And the number one thing they always say is, I didn't really do anything special. I didn't really do anything that's worth talking about. And I can tell you, well, that's 100% of the time of what I hear, 100% of the time, they're wrong. And it is these things where, and I love the idea of it getting buried or almost getting drowned out, because we all know the stories that make headline news, movies are made about them. And you have these stories of just regular people doing extraordinary things. And honestly, just being who they are, and they're put into extraordinary circumstances that then force these moments to happen, and they get drowned out because it's, well, I wasn't the hero, or I didn't get the Medal of Honor, or I didn't get these things. I didn't get the Silver Star, all these. And what we end up doing is we have this false narrative that we put on ourselves, and everyone is guilty of this, but for the veteran community, because it is life and death so often, or the death of loved ones that are around them. And then they are burdened with having to be able to live the rest of their lives with that burden that's silent. It just is. It's one of those things. I'm sure you got to experience that in like a very real way.
Well, you're using a very important word. I think that's essential, and it's essential for even why we would do a fallen comrade ceremony, or I now call them a more than thank you ceremony, because veterans need more than a thank you. But you use the word burden and burdensome, and that absolutely is what I have seen, and what I try to focus on is that burden, and being able to, you're right. Veterans all the time say, "Oh, I didn't do anything. I wasn't on the front lines. I was just a cook in the kitchen," or, "I never saw combat," or, or I remember, sometimes veterans would say, "Oh, you shouldn't be thanking me. Who you should be thanking are the ones who are not here that are buried overseas." So those types of things. Well, I'm on a mission to thank you, and you're going to be thanked, whether you want to be or not, because that's why I'm here. So, for many years, that's what I did. No, you're going to be thanked, and I would find some way to convince them that what they did was important. Well, I remember one veteran who changed everything, because when I forced my thank you on him, he said to me, "If you knew what I did, you wouldn't be thanking." Well, that was heartbreaking to me. I didn't know what to say in the moment, because I was,
Yeah.
it really stunned me. But oh my gosh, did I think long and hard after I left there about not only what he said, but how I had reacted to what I was imposing on him. So that changed everything. And I started looking at things a lot differently, listening a whole lot differently. I had to unlearn some things that I had been taught via just society in general, and, just, through my own nursing practitioner training and all those kinds of things. So I had to kind of unlearn some things. But one of the things, sometimes veterans would say, "I didn't do anything, but there is this saying in the military that says, some gave all, and all gave some." And see, that I realized that famous saying is veterans as a collective voice trying to say to us as the public, don't just lump us all in the same basket. We didn't all do the same thing. We didn't all do the same sacrifice. So now what I say to, when I would have veterans say those kinds of things to me about how they didn't do anything, I'll say, you're right. Some people did give all, and all gave some. Tell me about the some that you gave. And then we explore that, together. So it's creating that safe environment, the safe emotional environment, so that the untold story, I cannot tell you, John, how many times course, I'm at a dying veteran's bedside, and dying people are fertile ground for healing. I mean, it's a very different context than earlier in life. So I had that advantage. People become very vulnerable, but I can't tell you how many times a story would come forth and the spouse sitting at bedside or the adult child sitting at bedside will say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Never heard that story before.
He's never said that before." So, that's why there's this opportunity, and that's why I have been a real advocate in hospices. Hospices do a lot of pinning ceremonies and what have you at bedside now. That was something that we started at our own little VA that got picked up by NHPCO and the Hospice Veteran Partnerships and taken nationwide. So we're very glad about that. But again, the goal should not be to thank the veteran. That's just the vehicle to achieve the goal of gathering the untold story. What is the unfinished business? What are the unresolved losses that are burdening this person that they may not even admit to or may not even know are there because they're buried so deeply unconsciously. But when they come to their deathbed, for all of us, you and me included, when we're on our deathbed, the conscious mind gets weaker for all of us. The unconscious mind gets stronger for all of us. And that's when this unresolved stuff can sometimes come forward. So I'll tell you a little bit of the story. I know you all there in Virginia are getting ready to do a fallen comrade ceremony, and I'll tell you about how this came about, and I'm going to tell you it was totally inadvertent, although not surprising really. So I was, myself and my team were asked to come to a nursing home up in Ohio, actually, and to teach the staff about taking care of veterans at the end of life. So I had these staff, some of their staff with me, and I'd go visit a veteran. Down the hall, we'd go with all the veterans. Well, I'm at this one veteran's bedside, and this is the story that he said. He went to Vietnam, and his brother also was drafted. They were both drafted into the Vietnam War, but only he came home. So the unresolved loss for him was that they, for whatever reason, did not allow him to come back home to attend his brother's funeral. And when he did get home, it was sort of never spoken about. And he had tremendous guilt that he made it and his brother didn't. So as we explored this, and this was unsettling to say the least to him, and it was getting worse and worse as he was getting older. So I said to him, well, it's not too late. We can do a funeral for him. We can do a service for him right now, within the next day or two. So I sat with him and planned it with him. He had a son, and one of his biggest regrets was that his son had never met his uncle,
Right.
So at any rate, so we're planning this service kind of for him. And when I came back the next day, this was over about a 3-day period, he had told some of his other nursing home buddies about what we were doing. And then these other nursing home buddies are saying, "Oh, something like that happened to me too." This was in a state veterans home, so there were a lot of veterans there.
Sure.
So then I get the idea. I thought, well, what if we did this kind of like a collective thing and everybody can bring their own stories and mourn their own losses that they had?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, just a couple of people will show up, a couple of veterans and their families.
Little did you know.
Oh my God, how little did I know. So we plan this thing, we're thinking about 4 or 5 are going to show up or what have you. We have it in, it was this kind of big activity room, whatever it was. Anyway, it was a large room. And oh my God. Well, the whole room was filled, all these wheelchairs and everybody being wheeled in and what have you. And so we had a way of doing it that was very powerful to make it a communal thing, but also a private thing so that they could truly, what I call, lay their burdens down. And not only lay their burdens down, But for the rest of us who were there to support them and kind of be the container for their grief, to be able to collect those burdens and promise them that we would take them home with us so that we could carry the burden with them. The burden is going to stay the burden, but you won't be alone in it. So that was really inadvertently the very first Fallen Comrade ceremony. And since then, we've done many more, many more all over the country. And as I said, it is more than just a thank you, because sometimes, that meets our need to want to say thank you and to say thank you. It sometimes can glorify the positive things. And in no way do I want to minimize the positive things that veterans do. But that's not the only, when you only focus on that, oh, you're a hero. Oh, you did everything great. Oh, what is that? Those things are true. And there's this whole other arena that if we don't want to hear about those things, where do those things go? That kind of stuff we now know research about the brain tells us that kind of stuff gets stored in our bodies, gets stored in our brains, and it can complicate peaceful dying. I can tell you that. I can bear witness to that. And when you said that was a unique perspective that I bring, the reason is because there are thousands of hospice professionals. There are thousands of trauma and PTSD specialists, but there's only a handful of people who have specialized in both dying and trauma, both. And I think it is the confluence. It is the confluence of those two very different patient populations. It's the confluence of both of those patient populations that is yielding these lessons. And really what we've uncovered, what we call it is soul injury, soul, S-O-U-L. And soul injury, different than PTSD, different than moral injury. I've seen lots of both of those, but a soul injury we define as when you become separated from your own sense of self. So these veterans would sometimes say, yeah, I'm struggling with PTSD, but what I'm talking about is something different than that. It's how I lost myself. Of course, moral injuries, I really saw a lot of that surface. When you're getting ready to meet your maker, so to speak, the next day or next week, obviously those moral injuries would surface, and they did. But when veterans would talk about it, they would say, yeah, it's more than just the moral violation of my beliefs and values. It's what that did to me and how it made me become missing in action in my own life, it strangled me out of my own life. Well, see, that's the soul injury. And it can happen very insidiously, just very quietly, most of us have soul injuries. My own, I've never, really been traumatized, but I've had certain ways, even as a child, that I incorporated messages that told me, to never cry, to always put on a brave front and be embarrassed if there were any tears. So, a lot of the storytelling, creating those safe environments is how to allow space for the emotional pain they may be carrying, the burden, because, good soldiers don't cry. No pain, no gain. One time I'm going to show you, I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah.
But this was given to me one time by some people who so valued what I was doing with veterans in bringing those untold stories forward, the painful stories that no one else wants to hear. And this was actually handcrafted by an artisan up in Pennsylvania. And what it is a frozen tear. And you see the red, white, and blue inside. And yet the sparkles, which is the treasure, if you can unfreeze the tear, there is a treasure inside there.
That's beautiful.
Awaiting. So this is, always, I think, of great value to remember. Because I know, honestly, for the first 10 years of my VA career, I was really good at cheering patients up and telling them to stuff their stuff and, all that kind of stuff. So now I know that my job is to create a safe emotional environment so whatever they might be feeling can come forth.
And your background, again, that unique perspective, you've talked about this agitated death, right? The importance of telling these stories so that they can hopefully go as smoothly as possible, right? Into that good night. But a thing that you hit on, which I would love to flesh out for a moment, is this idea of how these memories, these untold stories, this agitation manifests into the body and not just into the mind, right? And it will cause an agitated exiting of this sphere. But the fact is, and I love the idea that you hit so much on, I'm really interested in the stories that happen after your service. What did you do next? And those stories are totally lost. But the idea of that these manifestations, right? This cancer that lives and that will start literally will manifest into cancer. But these things start to manifest as physical ailments. It really is this agitated state of living that these individuals are going to go through for the rest of their lives that then leads to an agitated exiting.
Well,
And how, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say agitated and or numbed out.
Totally.
That's another common thing. And when I say, using numbing agents, I don't just mean alcohol and drugs. You can numb out with overachieving, perfectionism, job success. There's all sorts, internet hopping and being obsessed with that. There's all sorts of ways to numb out so you do not feel the helplessness. The Bessel van der Kolk, he's written the book, The Body Keeps the Score. You may be familiar with that.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Yeah. So he has his early career also was with combat veterans. And, he and many, many others, he's just one of numerous researchers on trauma that know and understand much better now, just in the last 20 years, really, of how our brain works, how the amygdala, the impact that has, and how these memories get stored in the body unconsciously until they can be incorporated and integrated and released into consciousness. So, at any rate, I thought you were talking about dying. I didn't know if you want. I thought I would read the opening paragraph from my book, Soul Injury. Would that
Please
be okay?
do.
Because
Absolutely.
it really kind of captures what you were saying. But here's the opening paragraph of the book. Everything I've learned that has really mattered, I learned from the dying. Perspectives shift dramatically as death approaches. The day before you're given a terminal diagnosis, you take your life for granted. The day after, you wake up. Things you thought were so important now seem insignificant. And things that had been escaping your attention suddenly thrust themselves forward with an urgency to complete. That is the gift that death is. Just the threat of it awakens you to what is important and what is not. These revelations can be as tumultuous as an earthquake or as quiet and penetrating as a gentle snow that visited you overnight. But the stark realization causing the reverberation is the same. You are struck with the abrupt realization of how your life matters and how you.
Important is it for all of us to hear that you matter? Right. That is, it's a thing I do a lot of work with the youth and today's youth. And as they're going into middle school and high school and a lot of young men as well, specifically, and the lack of purpose, right? The lack of matter of why am I here? Like these age old tropes and concepts that, no matter how you fall on the religious scale, that religion really kind of figured out for, millennia, that now are lost again, of this concept of, do I matter? What's my purpose? Why am I here? It doesn't matter. And the fact of just having one person, even if it's in the 11th and a half hour, to say, you matter. What you did matter. What you did matters. What you've done matters. And being able to reconcile those things, it's huge. It's monumental.
Well, and even just the awakening of that. There's nothing more poignant than having a person on their deathbed wake up to look around, looking back up on their life and go, oh my gosh, my life did matter after all. Oh my gosh, I wasted it. Oh my gosh, I wasted my suffering instead of learning from it and growing from it. But what was always precious also was that even in that 11th and a half hour, as you call it, it wasn't too late. They woke up to that prior to leaving, or just that moment of realization of unity and oneness and a sense of, oh my gosh, I did matter after all. Yeah, maybe they had they experienced suffering that they wouldn't have had to have suffered otherwise, but they still got it before they left this earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fallen comrade ceremony, I want to talk, we'll talk some specifics on that as well. But as important as this is, right, for that veteran that is getting everything in order, right we've been referring to right before death comes, it seems like these stories, these all the preparation that happens for these events, they have got to be equally important for everyone else that is involved, every veteran that's involved, even just on the outside or just in a support role, of starting these conversations before they're at the end. I mean, it's got to be a massive ripple effect where it starts because of this need of that beautiful story of the veteran in Ohio who lost his brother and wasn't able to reconcile that. But this ripple effect that goes well beyond the comrade in which we are having this ceremony for, it's got to have made huge waves and massive impact for those that are not at that exact moment.
Well, you're bringing something very, very important up, and I often call them unsung heroes because veterans are often recognized nowadays, thank God.
Right. Yeah.
Vietnam vets for paving that way, that has finally happened. But who often are not recognized is their families. And, so I always call family members of veterans oftentimes unsung heroes. And they too have stories and of how the relationship was affected by that veteran's military service. So gathering those stories is often very important. So yeah, I think, encouraging people to gather the story is a start. The but that I'm going to say is make sure if you're the one that wants to gather that story, that you be prepared to hear both ends of the spectrum and be very aware of how you're biased toward only wanting to hear the positive things that happen, that only the good things, because those things have probably already been told and externalized already over their lifetime because other people are willing to hear that. It's the untold story. So you have to be careful that you're not overtly or even covertly reinforcing the idea of don't tell me the ugly stuff and how that impacted you. Don't tell me how that hurt you. Don't tell me about the burdens that you're carrying right now, because that was over, that was decades ago. And, you ended up having a good life. And look at all the good things that you did after you, we have all sorts of ways of still reinforcing to hide it. So I do think whoever's gathering the story, whether it's a spouse, a child, a healthcare worker, a nursing assistant, whoever it is, who has the courage, it takes I'm going to tell you, it takes some courage to sit and hear stories that are ugly, to hear stories that hurt that person, but vicariously will hurt you. And you have to be willing to be with that, to abide with that as well, because that's what will release the hurt. You have to mourn the loss, because mourning the loss is what releases the hurt. And that's what allows you to come a person to come to peace. So I would say, yes, great that you want to hear about veterans, great that you want to collect stories, but each person has to ask themselves, am I willing to hear the both ends of the spectrum, the full spectrum? And if I'm not, I wouldn't be asking the question and gathering the story. You haven't developed the courage really to hear both ends, because that's really important. So sometimes, when I first started these veterans programs nationally in hospices, they would just kind of recruit other veterans to go sit at another veteran's bedside. And so, and that sounds great. And there is a camaraderie that strikes up right away, veteran patient with a veteran volunteer hospice worker. But when the patient starts to, at dying, they're going to be telling some of this ugly stuff, and, a tear comes out. What do you think that untrained veteran volunteer says? Suck it up. Oh, blah, 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 whatever. So I always tell, when I do trainings, I say the worst thing you can do is put an untrained veteran with a dying patient veteran, because they're just going to reinforce, and it's really takes a lot of energy to keep that stoic wall up when you're dying, and you need your energy for some other things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
really
like to state the obvious, but absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So, any rate, so I would just say, if you want to hear a veteran's story, you have to be very intentional about it. You have to look within to see your own prejudices about veterans, or your own prejudice against emotional pain, and you just want to pretend like, life is always a bowl of cherries or a box of chocolates, as the movie said. No, it's all of it. Life is all of it. It's the full spectrum. And I think one of the advantages I have had is by hearing thousands of stories of war and thousands of stories of what it's like to live in the aftermath after that, and the impact that has had, and the vicarious impact it has had on me. I'm so grateful. I mean, you can see I can tear up so easily now, and yet my soul entry for the first 35 years of my life was that I did not cry. I could not cry because my parents reinforced. I had an older sister who cried at the drop of a hat. It got my parents. So I'm coming along behind. I thought, well, I won't do that. And, I was the nice, I was the stable one.
Yep.
Yeah. So I didn't cry until I was 35. And thank God I have the blessing of being able to experience the full spectrum of life, and not just the happy end that I tried to do for the first 35 years. So, there's a richness and a depth. Again, when tears are frozen, the treasure is trapped inside, as opposed to being in the full vitality of who we are right now. So that's the whole purpose of a fallen comrade ceremony, or a more than thank you ceremony. And I'm actually, John, we are very privileged today, because I actually have someone here with me that was at that very first fallen comrade ceremony. More than that, this person is a Bronze Star recipient from the Vietnam War, and she is the president of our nonprofit, Opus Peace. So I would like to introduce to you Marie Bainbridge.
Thank you very much.
Marie, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I always say that Marie's the real thing. She's the authentic thing. I'm just a storyteller. I'm just the conveyor of messages. But this woman is the real thing.
Well, there you go with your own bias, Deborah, against yourself.
Thank you for that, John.
Thank you. No problem. Well, Marie, so how do you get initially hooked up with Deborah? How do you end up being in that room in Ohio when this very first thing happens?
My husband and I lived in West Virginia, and the winters got so bad. He said, I don't want to stay. We'd go down here for 3 months to Florida, and every time we'd go by the VA, it was a magnificent thing on the water, these historic buildings. And so when we decided to move here, I thought, I think I'd like to work there. So in a phone interview, they hired me. Little did they know what they were getting. And so the only place that was open was the hospice unit. And it was by God's nature that I got to work on the hospice unit. And it was the first time I had my voice of what it was like to be in Vietnam, because no one else wanted to hear it. When my husband and I went to a group for Vietnam veterans, they stopped me at the door and said, "You can't come. It's only for men." And my husband said, "But she's a veteran." And they said no. And I understand that now. I didn't carry a gun. I didn't do that. I saw the aftermath because I was at the 45th Surgical Hospice Must, which we were capable of traveling, which we never did, but we were rubber Quonset huts, and all we took were life or limb saving. No pneumonias, no broken bones. All of ours came directly from the field. So it was, you lived with it. Nobody would know what I did, not even other nurses. So this was my first time that at Bay Pines, that I got to welcome other veterans home.
Marie, Deborah, have you all heard of the book The Women by Kristen Hanna?
I did. Yes.
I mean, this was so as a young person, I didn't get to experience even as a civilian what the Vietnam War was, right? That was my first exposure to the fact that there were no women in Vietnam. Right. And that's what the book, The Women by Kristen Hanna, that's what they're playing with, this concept, which is what a lie, right? That was that got passed on and was so strong. And the fact is that our main character in that book is a nurse that's dealing only with soldiers that are coming from the field that have catastrophic injury and having to be able to deal with that. I mean, it's an incredibly sad story, but to then get to have you be able to bookend it, to be in that place from a random phone interview of, "Hey, it's really beautiful, I want to move here," to where how divine is this idea that you end up in hospice of all the possible places. That was the only possible opening. And that just happens to be where you land.
As one of the bereavement coordinator, Pat McGuire, she would say, "Is it odd or is it God?" So I like to go along with that. It was like, okay, that's where I'm going, and I don't regret it. It was the best experience of my life, to tell you the truth. And so was Vietnam.
So, John, one of the things that she did in hospice that was just so touching, and I witnessed this many, many, many times, is to welcome home Vietnam veterans who never got welcomed home. So her husband, as she said, her husband is a Vietnam veteran also. They let him into the organizations, but they wouldn't let her in. But nevertheless, so I just want to show you something that, these colors, you probably know, the red, yellow, and green represent service in Southeast Asia. And so the tradition that has emerged over the last many years, we were introduced this by a Vietnam veteran on our unit. These are beads that can only be made by a Vietnam veteran and can only be given by a Vietnam veteran to another Vietnam veteran. So for our organization, Marie and her husband both make all the beads. So Marie, I want you to imagine that John is a Vietnam veteran.
All right.
And all of you in the viewing audience, any of you who actually are Vietnam veterans, I want you virtually and to imagine that this Vietnam veteran has something to say. So just do it as you used to do it with our patients.
Now, this is at the bedside, and the family is there in person or on the phone. And I would say these Vietnam beads are made by me or my husband. And when we came home from Vietnam, there was no brass bands. There was no welcoming home. But at this time, what I want to do is I want to welcome you home. And as I pin this over your heart, I want to say, welcome home. And I would kiss them on the cheek too and hug them. My husband refused to do that, but I did.
They would cry.
Everybody cried. Deborah, whenever we had a Vietnam pinning, she would alert everyone. So it was housekeeping, it was dietary, it was anyone that was on the floor would come into the room. And of course, the family was just like, then they opened up the dialogue, and they never heard these stories before. So, it even happens in Publix when I'm there.
That is a
She
Florida
carries-
reference. If you're
Yeah.
referencing Publix, you are
Yes.
definitely in Florida.
Yes.
I like
Well,
that.
she carries beads with
Mhm.
her, and you'll see somebody with a bumper sticker on their car or their hat, and just opening up that conversation, so that she can do that with Vietnam vets. We also have, if you can see this,
It's
the
hard.
light's
Yeah.
showing
Yeah.
weird. Well, at any rate, it's a little angel pin, and these we have for caregivers of veterans. Now, we're careful about who we give these to. Everybody knows and loves a veteran. I mean, they're so it doesn't mean anything to just hand them out to everybody just because they a veteran is in their midst. But we gather their stories because, for example, if you have a person who has a child whose parent was in the military and was, and they ended up going to 5 different grade schools, for example, as a child because of the change in orders. That's sacrifice. That impacts a kid. And so when you hear those kinds of stories, or if you hear, the Marine father who ran his family like the Marines, that's sacrifice. So when we hear those kinds of stories, so you don't just hand these out to any family member, but after you get their story, if it was a story of sacrifice, of hardship, then we would very ceremonially pin them with this. And of course, at our Fallen Comrade ceremony, we do honor all veterans, no matter, all of them had to follow orders and surrender their control to the U.S. government instead of their own lives and what they wanted. So there is absolutely sacrifice for all. But at the ceremony, one of the things that we will be doing is focusing. We will be providing education of what dying veterans would want non-dying veterans to know, and that kind of wisdom. So we will be educating them on the lessons from their fellow veterans that they would want. And number one, and then number two, honoring them and the families. And we will do a special ceremony for Vietnam veterans. But I think really more essentially and more importantly, because it's not done very often, we have a communal program where we use symbolically the burden of carrying a rock, carrying that stone, and being able to metaphorically, symbolically, because your unconscious works symbolically, symbols, to symbolically be able to lay that down. We have one of the interns that works with us to put on programs, and her husband's a combat Vietnam veteran and suffered horrible PTSD until he came to this ceremony. And he actually, was able to lay the rock down, write down on the rock what the burden was, what he had done, that he still felt so guilty about what happened. Anyway, was able to lay it down in this communal way. We have a ritual that we do. And what I loved was what he told me about afterward, which he said, weeks later, that event would come to his mind, and he would say, no, I left you on that rock in Tampa,
Right.
And he said he was, and his wife said he was a different man after the program. And she said, and I had to learn how to be a new wife. I'd never been a wife to this man before. And she said her adult kids had to learn how to have a different father. And she said he could actually enjoy his grandchildren's birthday parties now instead of, being worried about the noise or a balloon popping and triggering him or whatever. So, but I just love when Bruce said, yeah, thoughts will still come. And when they do, I just say, no, you're on that rock. I left you on that rock in Tampa. So it's being able to give people tools for how to release the burden to be able to open up. And that, it's definitely helps. The whole point of the service, the Fallen Comrade ceremony, is to provide a safe environment where you will not be judged. We are just going to all be in this together. We're going to hold it together with you. So it's powerful. It is powerful.
Yeah, it's that community, right? It's that community, those community rituals, right?
Yes.
And that symbolism that we all know how important. I mean, my goodness, the military is full of symbols. There's so much symbolism. There's so many aspects of it, but then it does get lost on us of like the power that those symbols, the power that those rituals have afterwards.
Also, those symbols can that are needed, that are necessary in the military, are end up overtaking their lives. And I'll just use stoicism and waving the flag and suck it up and all of that. That is hugely. It's important for all of us every day. We have to go to work whether we want to or not. We have to, stoicism. I don't want anybody to think that we are against stoicism. Stoicism is a very, we need grit. Man, and I must say sometimes there's not enough grit in people, so we
Yes,
need
ma'am.
grit and we need grace. We need both grit and grace. So what happens at the end of life is we knew how to be birthed into this world, and we know how to be on an unconscious level, how to be birthed out of this world. And it requires grace. And grace, that stoic wall starts to crumble and the grace comes forth. Thank God. Thank God. So what I used to always tell veterans is, use your stoicism more like a door that you can open and close at will, as opposed to a wall that just keeps you isolated and scary with other people and what have you. So that's really the skill that needs to be developed. And that's part of what the Fallen Comrade ceremony does as well. When I talk about educating people, I'm not just trying to educate you on what the military does and the sacrifice. Yeah, we get it. We know that in a lot of ways and a lot of not ways, but there's a lot of other ways to get that information. But what I want to educate you about is stoicism and all the symbols that go around that. And you need that and you want that, but you don't want it to overtake you and so that you lose who you really are, because you are more than just the grit of the military. And I know one of the saddest things for me, when people come to the end of their lives, all of us, you and me included, as we age, we start looking back over our lives. When you get near the end of your life, you really start doing what in the industry is called life review and making sense and connecting the dots. You have all these dots in our past, how do you connect them and make sense and meaning of them? And when that occurs, I always tell people that, if they're telling me about their military experience, and I might say to them, and if they're really totally overly identified with that, I'll say, well, tell me something, non-military about you. And they're just lost sometimes because they've overly identified with being a veteran. Tell me about some of the other aspects of you. So that's important too. Anytime we take something to the extreme, that causes complications on either end of the spectrum. So it really is, rather than compartmentalizing pieces of ourselves, scattered pieces of ourselves, what we do at Opus Peace, our nonprofit, our mission about soul injury is to help people heal the relationship they have with themselves. So that means you don't pretend like these scattered pieces of self that are hiding out in your unconscious aren't there.
Right.
No, you say, oh, I see you. Oh, gosh, who are you? Well, let's have a conversation. So you bring consciousness to these scattered pieces of self, and so that they're no longer compartmentalized, but can start becoming integrated. So it's not about becoming your best self. Yeah, you want to meet your best self and your worst self and all these selves in between. It's about all of it. See, that's too much of what I see with pop culture is become your best self. Just become more resilient. And I got to tell you, a lot of the veterans in the military, they really preach about being resilient. Just be more resilient. And they kind of leave those classes laughing because, they kind of say, yeah, if you only knew.
It's for sure. And it would just be like, you wouldn't have a clue. And I always appreciated that whenever I would hear these stories being like, well, whoever happens to be talking to them, say it's a young man. It's like, well, tell me what your combat experience has been. It's like, oh, well, I didn't serve. It's like, oh, well, then we can't really have a conversation about this, can we? And it's so genuine, and it can be taken offensively, but you got to take it for exactly what it means, which is like, how about you help me in an area that I'm not already in? I need that balance. And the way I've always heard it described is like an archway, right? So you have a keystone that lives in the middle of the archway that keeps both of this beautiful structure to stay upright. And on one side, in our example we're talking about, right, is stoicism. And then you have grace. And the problem is if you don't have enough pressure from the one side, that arch is going to collapse.
Yeah.
Right? And it will collapse because it's not there.
Yeah,
and you don't need less stoicism. It's there. It's strong. You need it there. The issue is this isn't fortified enough. It's not strong enough. And so being able to just, you talked about this soul trauma that even if you're not non-military or you have non-combat experience, but the soul injury is real. And your example that you gave, Deborah, was I wasn't allowed to cry, right? These things. So much of our lives is be more of and be less than. And we're told so much. Go ahead.
Which causes a soul injury.
Bingo.
Because when you're in a class or watching TV or whatever it is, or your counselor or whatever is telling you to be more resilient and develop more resiliency, then you kind of look around and go, well, everybody else seems to be able to do it. What's wrong with me?
What's wrong?
That can cause you to lose yourself. So, John, what we started when veterans started telling us about soul injury, and this is not meant in a religious way at all. If you think of the term soul, if you look up the word soul in the dictionary, it says soul is your total self. Don't you love that? I couldn't believe it when I looked it up in the dictionary. It said soul is your total self. So that's why we use the term soul injury. But what I wanted to say was once we started realizing that this term soul injury, I mean, it's so prevalent. Almost all of us have a soul injury. But what causes it? How do we acquire it? And really, so we started really kind of researching it and really listening very carefully, and we found 3 causes. This is basically what we were hearing from veterans. Number 1 was unmourned loss and hurt. Second, unforgiven guilt and shame. And third is fear of helplessness and loss of control. And number 3 is almost totally overlooked. And I don't understand it because Bessel van der Kolk says that the number 1 cause of PTSD is immobilization when the trauma occurred.
Sure.
That's the number 1 cause, he says, of PTSD. And the DSM, the previous DSM, had that as one of the criteria, is helplessness at the time of the trauma. When the newer edition, the more recent edition came out, it no longer has the immobilization and helplessness there. They still talk about it, but it's not one of the diagnostic criteria, which I thought, oh my gosh, you guys are missing the boat, because I'm telling you, in hospice, that's what it is. People become helpless at the end of life. That's a trigger for when they felt helpless in the military and doing whatever they were doing, where they were in a helpless situation. And what happens, you feel so helpless. Well, what do you do to overcome that afterward? You become overly controlling. I'm going to control everything so I never feel so helpless again. So you'll see a lot of overly controlling behaviors. So we deal a lot with helping people, instead of being overly controlling, is get with your body, anchor your heart, take a moment to feel how helpless you were in that situation. Let yourself feel it, because what they're trying to do is to not feel it. And the paradoxical thing is, once they let themselves feel their helplessness, and oh my gosh, I survived it. I can feel it. It's just a feeling. It's just a feeling. So, at any rate, that's really a lot of the work that we do, is helping people, and most of our clientele are not just a small percentage really are veterans, because we deal with the whole population, is helping people learn how to move from numbing their pain to mourning their pain so that their hurt can be released. To move from, irrational guilt about things they had no control over to being able to forgive themselves for what they did have control over, and also to stop fearing who they are and who they are not, and the shame that that often carries, because there's nothing like shame to separate you from your own sense of self. And then lastly, and in some ways most importantly, especially if they're overly controlling, is to help people feel their helplessness. It is a part of life. We can't control everything. We are limited. And to be able to get real with that. So, we always say a soul injury occurs when you are separated from your real self. So again, the best version of you is real. The worst version of you is real too. And all the versions in between are real also. So it's not about being ashamed of any of those. It's not about being ashamed of your darkness or being ashamed. A lot of people are ashamed of their light and their goodness, So it's not about, it's opening up and being with whoever is there and bring consciousness to these scattered pieces of self.
Yeah, mending and healing that total self, which is the soul, right? Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for the work that you guys are doing. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be able to bring it to light even further. Fallen Comrade ceremony. So everyone that's listening and watching, what if they want to be involved? They want to go, they're interested in participating and assisting to maybe even getting something started, right? Where they are. How do they even go about this process with you all?
Well, the easiest way that's happening right regionally in your area is to participate on November 7th at the Fallen Comrade ceremony, and it is in Fishersville, Virginia. And one of the executive director of Opus Peace actually will be there on property, on site, as will the hosts that are hosting this. So how you get involved, number one, I would say what could happen right now is to just get curious about the conversation like we've been having, and become insightful about what your own prejudices might be about veterans and wanting to be educated about that. And to also right now prepare yourself to maybe cultivate a desire to want to be an agent of peace for people, to help people lay their burdens down. And lastly, in preparation, I would say start learning. Our website is opuspeace.org or soulinjury.org, either one. We have lots of materials that will help you learn how to create a safe emotional environment so that people can feel safe with you to lay the burdens down. So that would be step one, is preparation from the time they hear this until November 7th. And second would be to show up that day. So you can just be a private citizen. You're not really there for any particular reason other than to have an experience of your own. Second, you may be a professional that works in healthcare of some kind. 20% of your patients are veterans. So, this is maybe relevant. You may have a veteran in your family, our friendship or neighborhood that you want to be an agent of peace with, possibly. And lastly, I would say if you're a veteran yourself, I would invite you just to come, test the waters, and just kind of see what might be there. It is a very safe environment where people will be invited to participate or not participate, as there's no forced thing of anything, and just witnessing it. Some veterans are like, okay, I'm not doing anything, and they're not going to be asked to do much, but there will be a couple of places where they might be asked to do something, but there is no judgment and no pressure at all to not do it either. There's something, community, common unity, just being able to be there in that space together demonstrates a witnessing and an understanding and a desire to want to help heal. the way we heal our nation after war requires every single one of us. No one is immune. It's not up to these veterans to heal themselves by themselves. We're all in this together. And veterans, think twice before thanking a veteran unless you know his or her story first. Otherwise, it's just rote. People say, oh, thank you for your service. And it's coming from here, maybe here. But the only way it can come from here is that person's story. And you can thank them for specifically and uniquely what that person did. There is a hero in every veteran, and there's a coward in every veteran. And they often are ashamed of the cowardice that any one of us would have, that all of us have. So you have to create space for the coward also, because that's often what they're covering up. But again, I always come with no preconceived. I don't know you. I don't know, what's there for you, but I am sure willing to be here with the hero that you are. And I am sure willing to be here with the coward that you are, because I have a coward inside me and I have a hero inside me also. And even though it's only this much compared to what you have had to be put through, I'm still very much aware that they are both there.
And we're part of that community. And I think that's
what I would say is there are resources that will be at the ceremony on November 7th that people can take away. Part of the non-veterans will be asked to pick up some of those burdens and promise to cherish and honor them and abide with them thereafter. That's a huge piece on a spiritual level. That's a huge piece, and it means a lot to veterans.
Well, if you feel called to participate, it's November 7th from 2 to 4 p.m. The Fallen Comrade ceremony is at the Augusta Expo. It's going to be an amazing event, right? Sponsored by Augusta Health and the Hospice of Shenandoah. It's right off of the main highway there, 64 and 81, where they're going to come together at 277 Expo Road, Building 3 in Fishersville, Virginia.
The other thing, John, I would say that people can do if they like what they see and experience, and they do want to be an agent of that and do it in their own companies or we actually have what's called Masterpiece online learning. And we actually did a ceremony complete with the PowerPoints. Marie is on it talking about Vietnam. I am on it. Anyway, we handle the educational pieces. We have a facilitators. It's literally plug and play with veteran stories, so that the ceremony that they're going to see on November 7th, we actually have it so that they can have electronically the same ceremony and do it in their own. It's not just watching a video. I'm not talking about that. It's being able to put it on live themselves, but it's easy. This is a big production, what they're doing November 7th. But we have an online version that companies can do within their own organization. That's pretty much plug and play. And we work with them. As I said, our executive director will be there November 7th, and she works with organizations all the time to put these on. So that's another easy way, powerful way, profound way to do more than just thank a veteran. That's just not enough.
Outstanding. Deborah, Marie, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, sounds strong, John.